What's up, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and tactics and ballistics and guns and gear and ammo the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about perhaps a hidden gem and an untapped resource in a survival rifle world. If you're a regular at Gunfighter Life, you may have heard an episode, Shooting Quiet Without a Suppressor. If not, you can go look it up. But this idea is actually what sparked that entire podcast. It kind of snowballed, by God's grace, into its own episode, which often happens. And I mentioned in that episode about this type of rifle and some of the attributes that might make it for you a good go-to survival rifle. But if I went too far down that rabbit hole, it would have been a really long rabbit hole. So I thought it deserved its own podcast episode. So here we are. With that, I don't often mention it, but if you want some cool merchandise, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com. If this is not your first rodeo and you want to support the podcast that way. Also, if you haven't, make sure you're liked and subscribed if you want to be, and hit some stars, leave a review. The number one way you can support, and I'd be humbled if you chose to do so, is to become a patron. Should be a link in the show notes. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic of the show. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts: Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Now I'm going to start this main body by talking about and being honest with you guys, because you guys give me your time and I'm humbled by that. My go-to, if I had to have one long gun, I probably would have a long gun and a handgun, but if I was relegated to one long gun in a peanut butter and chocolate scenario hitting the fan, no other caveats, not like there's Cuban paratroopers coming out of the sky and I'm going to the bathroom in the radiator. Just in general, my one go-to long gun. That for me is not even a rifle at all. And it's not a 22 long rifle, although that might be my second choice. And it's not an AR, but I know that those things are on a lot of people's. Those, either an AR or a 22 long rifle, or for some a scout rifle, that would be high on the list for a lot of people. They'd be high on the list for me, might be in the top 10. Almost certainly the top 10, maybe the top 5. Just not number 1, but they are a lot of people's number 1. So I want to talk about perhaps an underutilized resource and how we might be able to give a little bit more utility to a survival rifle. Now let's start by talking about the 22 long rifle for a one go-to long gun, peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan gun, and why a lot of people make it their number 1. Okay. I think if a lot of people are honest, they'd say number 1, it's cheap, which is not to be underestimated, right? It is cheap. For a lot of people getting into preparedness, they get this and they want to justify it. That doesn't make it bad, but that is a reason, and it might be a good reason. It's better to have a 22 long rifle and know how to use it and have a stockpile of ammo than dreaming about having a Benelli M4. So a lot of people get it because it's inexpensive. A couple of other key attributes: it has light recoil, not to be underestimated, especially for a new shooter, or if you want to give it to a new shooter. Low recoil also means fast follow-up shots. And the kicker here, the big one that people will espouse, is this being the apocalypse rifle filet mignon, if you will, is that you can carry a ton of ammo. And in this, it gets the gold medal, right? As far as common rounds go, you can carry a lot of 22 long rifle ammo, and that is a big deal. Not only could you carry 1,000 rounds of 22 long rifle ammo, you could carry it in your cargo pockets. Try carrying 1,000 rounds of 12 gauge. Be comical. You'd have to have like a survival rickshaw. Even 1,000 rounds of 308, you're just not going to do it. And a man-portable system. 1,000 rounds of 223 even is impractical on a man-portable system, meaning in a rucksack on your person, in your battle belt or your LBV, your body armor, whatever your setup is. 1,000 rounds is not really feasible and practical. But again, 1,000 rounds of 22 is totally doable. You could even do more than that. If you're judicious, you could literally carry a lifetime supply of ammo on your back. That's it. That gets the nod for that, right? Like I said, it wins the gold medal. It's the filet mignon of ammo capacity, carryability. Also, usually, and not always, but usually, the 22 long rifle platforms are light, right? A Ruger 1022 or a Marlin Model 60 or something akin to that is going to be lighter than a lot of centerfire rifles are going to be. Also, it is a good and go-to small game-getting round, putting meat on the table. And it's a decent, let's be honest, poaching round for people that poach deer. I don't advise that unless you're starving to death, in which case just once you get rescued, pay the fine or whatever, and render unto Caesars, but it's better than starving to death. It has the real potential, and quite often is realized, of being a defensive round, of actually stopping people. It's not the best, but it will work. For all those reasons, a lot of people put the 22LR high or number 1 on their list. So what's the demerits of this go-to weapon? Well, the real one is power, right? A 22 long rifle is not a great round. I don't want to get it wrapped around the axle on whether or not stopping power is an actual thing, but 22 long rifle is by far less powerful than most other rounds. It's also far less reliable. Even if the gun itself, and it's not, even if the gun itself is 100% reliable, rimfire ammo is not as reliable as centerfire ammo in vast generalities. Like, even really good rimfire ammo is usually not as reliable as the dirt cheap bottom of the barrel steel cased wolf ammo as far as ignition goes. And that has to do with the rimfire ability of it. If you're talking about pulling the trigger and needing that gun to go off because your life depends on it, that's a big deal. So a few demerits there. Now let's talk about a lot of people's their go-to gun for the Reese's Pieces hitting the fan, right? It's going to be an AR. Why? I think honestly, just like I started out with on the 22, honestly, it's because a lot of people have them. And they like to justify what they already have or justify the purchase of one. I think that's a big reason. It's what the military uses. So if the military uses it, it must be great. Remember, that's a different philosophy. That's a different thing. I'm not talking about a pure battlefield implement. I'm talking about a go-to, that's your one long gun. So I think a lot of people have it. It's popular. They're fun to shoot. They look cool on Instagram. They're a cool gun, and people try and justify that as their one long gun, if I'm being honest. And there is a place for ARs. Talking about this being your one go-to long gun. What are their attributes? Well, not so much as the 22, but one of the big reasons we switched to it from the 308, from the full-size battle rifle to the intermediate cartridge, is that you can carry a lot more ammo. Again, not as much as a 22, but a lot more. Let's say pound for pound, maybe twice as much as a 308. So not just in weight, but also in size and weight of loaded mags, of the ammo itself, and weight, because that's a big deal if you're carrying it on your back. Ask any grunt in the Marine Corps or any infantryman rucking something in the Army. That weight, it matters. So it does have lightweight ammo. Not as much as the 22 long rifle, but quite a bit lighter than a lot of other rounds. And although it was originally designed as a varmint cartridge, the 222, which was adapted into the 223 and the lineage thereof, but it has proven in decades that it might not be the most reliable at stopping people in defensive situations, but it is effective in that role. Also, it has a lot less recoil than a full-size rifle round. And I do think a lot of people make their ARs way too heavy, either by going with a way heavier barrel than they need, like a government profile barrel when they're not going to go full auto, or by adding a whole bunch of superfluous stuff hanging off of it. However, you can get a very effective and lightweight AR, so that's a plus there. What are its demerits? Well, in general, and I know people hunt with ARs, you don't have to correct me on this, but there is not a good professional deer hunter, I don't think, that you would find that says a 223 is the best deer round. Right? It's not great for that. And it's a good varmint round, because that's what the 222, which became the 223 5.56, was birthed forth from, right? It's a good varmint round, it's a good coyote round, it's a good prairie dog round. But it's not good on small game that you want to eat, right? You don't want to shoot a quail with XM193 or M855, especially some expanding varmint type round, right? Because if you want to eat it, if you just want to kill it, fine. If you want to shoot a quail and have it for dinner, the 223 is in its normal configuration, not cool for that. So most small game, it'll kill it if you can hit it with the height over bore and the issues that come along with that, which is not really designed for. But if you can hit it, you could kill small game with it. Again, it's a varmint cartridge designed to blow flesh apart, which is not good if you want to eat it. So it gets demerits there. All that, if you listen to all that preamble, is what I'm getting to today. What if you could take a lot of advantages of that 223 5.56 round and give it more versatility and the ability to shoot small game, the ability to be far quieter than normal ammo even without a suppressor, and still keep the ability to shoot full-powered go-to ammo. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, there is a thing called a scout rifle. Many people, that's like their main deal, like the scout rifle. Now, the scout rifle is designed to be as I understand it, I am not a scout rifle expert. I did a whole episode I've done a couple, but I did one where I interviewed somebody I would consider a scout rifle expert. You can go back and listen to that episode, and I'm very gracious to Steve for coming on the show and doing that. The scout rifle is kind of a general purpose rifle designed to be able to hunt up to very large game, even going to Africa with. Being a decent defensive rifle, it's kind of do-it-all rifle. Good for snap, quick, handy shooting. Good for taking large game, good for defense. Now, there are other rounds, but the general go-to round for that is .308, and for good reason. However, I don't know if this is already a term, but what about a light scout? Because, let's be honest, most of us aren't going to Africa. Unless you live in Africa, a peanut butter and chocolate scenario is not going to involve lions or kudu. The vast majority of Americans live east of the Mississippi River. Aside from some pockets in Maine, and I know there are elk now east of the Mississippi, but I wouldn't rely on them hanging around too long, or even counting on that for a source of any kind of meat. So for most people east of the Mississippi, deer is going to be your biggest game resource. So for a general go-to rifle east of the Mississippi for defense, for an emergency rifle, let's call it an emergency rifle, like break glass in case of Hardtimes tool, right? The .223 would be sufficient for taking deer. Again, it's not the best deer round, but it'll certainly do it with proper ammo selection and proper bullet selection. Don't go hunting deer with XM193, which is your 55-grain ball. That is not the appropriate bullet for that. With proper bullet selection, it's a mediocre deer round. So we got that. It's also a proven defensive round, which we already covered. It's a crappy small game round in its original guise. A scout rifle is generally considered a bolt-action rifle, which means manually operated. What if you could download that .223 round to make it akin to a .22 long rifle round? Well, you can get pretty close, and you can do that with a kind of powder called Trail Boss. And reloading is not rocket surgery. It's not hard, and doesn't have to be expensive if you do it simply and stay smart. But they make a powder called Trail Boss and some other powders that you can download effectively, which means, and I've seen the numbers, if the numbers are correct, you can download with using Trail Boss to get around 1,000 feet a second. Now, not only is that subsonic usually, but it's also not going to tear game apart if you, again, are judicious in your bullet selection. So now you could have this scout rifle, and it could be your go-to rifle. A lot of them take Stanag, they take AR type mags. So all those common, you could have it loaded with, and my go-to are 20 round, not 30 round mags, but you could have it loaded with your 20 round, whatever your go-to is, 64 grain soft point, or a solid copper monolithic for a defensive and medium game hunting round. Of all the versatility and defensive capability of that round. You could have some other mags, and you could mark them with red or blue or yellow or whatever, just a piece of electrical tape in that color. And you could have your optic. If it's inside 25 yards, it may make very little practical difference. The difference in point of aim, point of impact may be academic. You'd have to test it in your rifle fired by you. But even if you needed 2 sets of dope, which dope is the information settings for you and your rifle to interact with the target, most modern scopes have 0 stops and things like that. You could have it zeroed for your go-to defensive round, which I would. You could, as simple as taking a paint Sharpie or a paint marker and mark a different set of dope. Let's say your mags are marked with yellow electrical tape. Then you take a yellow paint marker and mark a different dope on your scope. And if you wanted to, let's say, shoot a grouse and not explode it and be quiet because you're hungry, you haven't seen any deer today, you're in this valley, you see a grouse, you want to shoot it, but you don't want to ruin your entire rest of your day of hunting in case you do come across a deer, which is more meat. So you could pop in one of these mags, shoot the grouse, and not give away your position, and be able to eat the grouse, right? Because you could shoot it with your regular load, but you might not be able to eat much. That gives you a lot of utility. Also, if you wanted to shoot for whatever other reason and be quiet. With a long barrel and less powder and less pressure, you can get pretty quiet without the need of a suppressor. So that's a lot of added utility. You just turn that big drawback that the AR doesn't have into a capability, because you can take small game, you can take medium game, and you can have a defensive rifle. You can have your Steyr Scout rifle in 223, or I don't know if it's a true scout, but as I understand it, even the Steyr Scout rifle is not a true scout. Anyway, you could have your Mossberg MVP, which is a scout-ish, quasi-scout rifle, right, with your optic and your backup iron sights and your regular AR mags, and it's a bolt action, so you could fire both these rounds. The reason you can't fire, if you don't know, I probably should have covered that, you can't fire these regular rounds in an AR and have it cycle. It'll likely not cycle at all, or even worse, cause a serious malfunction, which is not good, right? So semi-autos are not the go-to for this. So your bolt action scout rifle, you could also use a lever action if you so chose. In 223, you could also use a pump action. I do believe they did make the 760 in a pump action 223, which would be pretty cool. Also, if your rifle has the ability to single load, which some scout rifles do, and again you had your regular go-to round in there, you could just pop it out and literally just go to your side saddle, grab one round, put that quiet round in your gun and fire that one round. And then if things went sideways, you'd have your regular magazine already in the gun loaded with your go-to rounds for defense. I just checked, and yes, I do believe they made the 760 in a 223. So you get all that 223 in the regular configuration. You get light ammo, the ability to carry a lot of ammo, not as much as the 22, but quite a bit. The ability to take medium game without having to get 25 yards away and make a head or neck shot. You could take it at normal deer hunting ranges and be okay with a body shot. So you get a lot of versatility and utility there, and I think this is an underrated and underappreciated potential, and perhaps a case for a manually operated 223, 5.56 type rifle, whether it's a scout rifle or some other rifle. You do have the option of a break action single shot, but I would not want to count on that as my go-to rifle because it lacks reasonable rate of fire. Okay, so what's another option here? We talked about the AR, but the AR is not going to cycle these rounds. Not going to cycle these light-loaded trail boss or similar downloaded powder rounds. Public service announcement. If you don't know what you're doing, you cannot just download most powders. You get to a point where instead of it all igniting in a controlled manner, it will ignite all at once because there's too much room in the case. It can cause very high pressures and damage, hopefully just the gun, but maybe the gun and yourself. Unless you know what you're doing and stick to a published load, don't do this. But there are safe ways to download centerfire rifle ammo. Anyway, if you're doing that safely, these aren't going to cycle in your AR. They're probably going to cause a malfunction, a double feed, failure to extract probably, which you're going to have to clear that malfunction and get it reloaded, which is probably going to be worse than a break action single shot. But some ARs, my go-to AR, and a lot of other ARs have a gas shutoff valve. I'm not talking about the suppressor setting, that's like half gas. Or I don't know, half is just what I'm throwing out there. I don't know what percentage of gas that lets through. Less than normal, I'm talking about a gas shutoff valve. My go-to AR has a gas shutoff valve. It's a piston gun. It has a gas shutoff valve. So I essentially turn that into a straight pull bolt action. I fire that one round. Nothing happens in the bolt because the gas is shut off. So it doesn't cycle the bolt back at all. I rack the charging handle and rack another round in. Right? So now I have, if I wanted to, my regular AR with all the battlefield capability of a good quality AR. Again, if I want to hunt small game or I want to be, secret squirrel mode, I can turn that gas off and put my other magazine in and be clandestine. So it gives quite a bit of capability. A lot of people, when they think about like a survival scenario, they, I think, have it more skewed towards a tactical kind of operation. And as you heard the bio, I've been a professional gunfighter by God's grace and survived it for the majority of my adult life. But even in that, I've gone long periods of time without getting in a gunfight. Even in going to war, there were long periods of time where there was no firefight. But unless I was fasting, I've wanted to eat every day, right? And eating is part of staying alive, as in survival scenario. No matter how many, maybe you're twice as tactical as me, maybe you've twice as many violent encounters as I have, you've still had to eat more. And if you're relying on this gun to put food on the table, I don't think the regular 223 round is a wise choice. I think the downloaded powder puff loads, let's call them that, the ability to fire a sensible projectile at 1,000 feet a second, not exploding your game, being able to eat it, and being quiet, adds a lot of utility to this platform. So I thought it was worth a podcast. If you want to hear more about shooting quietly and you haven't already listened, go listen to the Shooting Quiet Without a Suppressor episode. You might find it useful. But again, I thought this required a little bit more than just a brief mention. Anyway, with that, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Gunfighter Life. Now, whatever gun you decide for your peanut butter and chocolate scenario, there's one thing there's several things, but there's an additional thing you're going to want to have, and that's a knife. It's a pretty good segue into, not only is somebody kind enough to support on Patreon, that patron was kind enough to offer up one of his knives, a really good EDC go-to knife, a K-Bar Folding Hunter. Very good EDC knife, be very good for skinning game and things like that. Anyway, he's graciously offered to raffle that off to any patron that joins this month, and that is the month of November in the year of our Lord 2022. If you thought this content was valuable, worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, or entertaining in that value, you can become a patron. If you don't know, Patreon is a way that you support the podcast, and I give you guys content early, commercial free, give you special insider only content, get a whole zombie apocalypse gun episode just for fun for the patrons, and a lot of other stuff. They also get to be part of an insider chat where we talk to each other about this kind of stuff and more important stuff all the time. And if you want that, or be a part of that, or support, I am truly humbled. I am humbled that anybody listens, and even more humbled if you decide to step up and support the podcast. With that, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com, or there should be a link directly to the Patreon page in the show notes. As a thanks for staying tuned through all this and giving your time to the podcast, I like to give a tactical tip. This is your tactical tip because it's getting close to winter. It already very much feels like winter where I am, but it's going to be cold outside. If you take a metal gun and are outside hunting or doing whatever, reconnoitering, whatever you're doing all day, a gun gets really cold and you take it into a warm house, it will likely sweat beads of water. I shouldn't have to explain, that's not good. If you're going to use it again soon, you may consider just leaving it somewhere outside, locked in a garage or in the truck where it's not as warm, so that it doesn't sweat. If you are going to bring it inside, it causes that as a major temperature change in a short amount of time. So you may, if you have like a mud room or a laundry room or something like that, you want to take that rifle, set it in there for an hour or two, or overnight, whatever, before you bring it into your 72 degrees house. That rifle is just, 15 degrees. It goes from 15 to 72. With any decent amount of humidity in the air, you're likely to get that rifle sweating. On the outside, that's not a big deal because you just wipe it down or whatever, but what about the bore? What about the insides? What about the fine internals? You've got this mix of water and oil all inside there. If you can, put it in an intermediate place where it's not as warm, where it's not going to sweat. Anyway, if that saves you one rusty gun, probably worth the listen. And hopefully what you find even more useful is the tactical verse of the day. Deuteronomy, chapter 20. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So it shall be when you are on the verge of battle that the priest shall approach and speak to the people, and he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. Do not be afraid, and do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. What a beautiful verse. If God is for us, who can be against us? With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.